My new book is called Louis Armstrong, Master of Modernism, and it begins in 1922 when Armstrong left New Orleans for Chicago. This must have been taken just before he left. And when he went to Chicago, he was, of course, going in the wave of the Great Migration, which had picked up in the mid-19-teens, and some 50,000 people during the next decade, from 1915 to the late 20s, moved from the South to Chicago, to the South Side of Chicago. Armstrong was not exactly driven in the same way. He was more invited by his mentor, Joe Oliver, who was already in Chicago and doing extremely well at a place called the Lincoln Gardens. Here's the only photo we have of the exterior of Lincoln Gardens, and here's the only photo we have of the interior of Lincoln Gardens. So Armstrong stepped into this scene that Oliver was dominating in 1922. Oliver had been crowned the king of Lincoln Gardens in 1922. They had actually had a ceremony where they made a paper crown and put it on his head, and men threw their hats up in the air in this joyous occasion. Here's a picture of Oliver's band as when Armstrong stepped into it. Armstrong played with Oliver for nearly 2 years as an apprentice, basically, as a second trumpeter supporting Oliver. That's what his job was. Now we're going to jump ahead to 1925, and Armstrong got a job in this place. This is called the Vendome Theater. And now he was a little nervous to take this job, actually. He was at the top of his game. He was coming into his mature years as the greatest jazz soloist in the country. But he was still kind of nervous to take this job, and for good reasons, because this was, the main music was provided by a symphony orchestra. Armstrong exchanged his cornet for a trumpet there, actually. Armstrong accepted this challenge. He was reluctant to go on the stage and play classical solos, but he did it, and he also played what were called hot solos. That was actually why he was brought in. He played there for 18 months at the Vendome Theater, and he said that that's where he discovered his mature solo style. So that's quite significant. The solo style that would transform all of jazz was discovered at this place. The final venue I want to just mention that I cover in the book quite a bit is the Savoy Ballroom. The Savoy Ballroom was brand new in 1927. Somebody said that here's where Armstrong really took over. We know that he played his famous West End blues at the Savoy Ballroom. This is one of the most famous pieces by Armstrong, one of the most famous pieces from the 1920s. All jazz textbooks will mention the West End blues. And we know he recorded this on June 28, 1928. About a week after he recorded it, this guy, Dave Payton, who is the columnist in the Chicago Defender, actually, the music writer, he's probably the most important African-American writer on music in the country at this time. He starts calling Armstrong King Menelik. Now this is quite interesting. King Menelik was an Ethiopian king around 1890 who won a military victory over the Italians and drove the Italians out of Ethiopia. This is a huge anti-colonial moment. And by doing that, he became a hero to African Americans everywhere, actually. So for Payton to be calling Armstrong King Menelik is quite a powerful statement, actually. A week later, he said Armstrong slew all the Ophé demons the other night at the Savoy Ballroom. Ophé is slang for white. So Armstrong is slaying white demons at the Savoy Ballroom. Why would that be the case? Well, by 1928, jazz had become a very diverse field of music, all kinds of jazz. You have Paul Whiteman, you have George Gershwin, you have Irving Berlin, you have a lot of white dance bands and so forth. And whites were starting to claim supremacy in jazz, actually, by 1928. So I think that's how I interpret what Payton is saying. And what would Armstrong's weapon have been? It would have been the introduction to West End blues, this famous introduction, which is music that had never been heard before, actually. It's so astonishingly virtuoso and so identifiably black in its bluesiness, in its improvisational touches, in its fluidity, and all these things. So to me, that's the weapon of choice in 1928. Thank you.